Let me share with you as we get started on this third class lesson. I'm going to be talking about the realities of racism tonight. Monday, January the 18th, was Martin Luther King's birthday, and it was, I watched some documentaries about his assassin and the murder and some of his work. It's an interesting thing as someone who has done counseling to recognize that people don't do what they do by chance. They don't engage in the behavior they do uh, arbitrarily. There's always a reason behind why people do what they do. And sometimes when we know the reason behind what people do, it helps us to understand them a great deal more. And so tonight, because I have never experienced the kind of prejudice that some have experienced, I'm going to be introducing to you through videos and through stories and through even some laws and circumstances here in Lubbock, uh, what some have experienced. And my hope is that it will help us grow in our understanding and that it will help us to be more vocal advocates for what is right and what would be pleasing to God. So that's kind of where we're going tonight. And I want to begin with this quote. If you've got the study sheet with you tonight, I'm interested to hear your reaction to this quote from James A. Baldwin. He said, to be a Negro in this country and to be relatively conscious is to be in a rage almost all the time. What's your reaction to that quote?
It's a shame. It's a shame that when he wrote this many years ago, it hadn't changed. It's still the
Yeah,
same.
yeah, it's a shame, and the circumstances haven't changed since this was written years ago. Does it surprise you to hear those words? Um, is it something you would expect? I mean, what's your reaction to this? Let me back into a different question related to this, though. What do you think he's angry about? When he talks about to be in a rage almost all the time, what's he in a rage? What's the rage about?
I would say about how he is being treated, or uh, not being able to do things that everyone else can do.
Yeah, if you kept bumping into a wall that you could seem to never escape, it would be really frustrating all the time. If you were treated with disrespect and your dignity was not protected, if that's the way you were treated consistently, that would be really frustrating. What's the rage about? I mean, I don't know how many of you watched some of the protests and riots that went on, or maybe even heard some of the professional athletes um, express themselves. But when you saw the rage and the reaction that we often saw, did you wonder what's the anger about? Did you ask yourself what's behind the anger? Again, people don't do what they do arbitrarily. There's a purpose behind it. There's a reason behind it. Whether we understand it or not, whether we agree with it or not, is irrelevant. There's a reason behind it. So what do you think the rage is about?
Can I say something there?
Okay, you did. I see Roger. I'm having a hard time hearing you.
Yeah, I'm not hearing. You are cutting in and out. Maybe it is my internet. I don't know. But
Okay.
Do you hear me now?
I hear you a little bit better. Yes.
Yes, sir. I would suggest probably he is craving for some kind of recognition, or he has done something better, but nobody is appreciating him. That's why he gets mad.
Okay, so a desire for some recognition, and
You
the
hear
fact
me?
that he doesn't get that recognition is very frustrating. The fact that we're being silent about this, either because we don't want to share or because we don't know the answer, I hope that after what we talk about tonight, I hope you'll have a clear understanding of the answer.
Dale,
Yes, Steve.
if you were about 20 years younger and you just met Lori and everybody that you knew told you you could not ever marry her, so the hope that you had, you lost hope, and every turn you knew you loved her, if you told every corner that you could not marry her, will you lose hope? Basically, you lose your identity as a human being because at every corner you've been told no, you lose that hope.
And so living in a hopeless situation kind of steals your meaning and purpose, doesn't it? So,
Adele, this is Joel. I
hey,
think
Joel.
I think speaking from like a point of view as someone who is like in academia and who's working through a graduate degree, I think that sometimes what you often get is you have people make comments like, "Oh well, you're either exceptional." In comparison to everybody else that's black, somehow you've managed to make it, or you are the product of a handout in the form of affirmative action. And sometimes it makes, I mean, it's like, we don't expect you to be here. It's like telling a kid you're wise beyond your years. It's like, how did you manage to gain this wisdom as a black person? And then it's also, oh well, it's either that or it's, oh, this is affirmative action. You're here because we gave you a handout. That's why you're here. It's very complex. In the wake of George Floyd, with after he was murdered, and you saw people rioting through the streets and things like that, and people didn't understand why buildings were being burned down. And we asked ourselves, it's like, well, you're more outraged by Target being burned down than you are, George Floyd dying. And it's like, yeah, we don't want the looting and rioting either, but it's like, after you try to make your voices heard for so long, then what else do you do? And I think that a lot of black people just ask themselves that question: what else are we supposed to do? How do we gain respect? How do we make others realize that we're human beings and we're not these 3/5 of a human being that we've been called for so long? So, that's just a little bit of insight.
Well, thank you, Joel. I think what's interesting about one of the first things you said is that what may have been intended by a person as a compliment, oh, look how far you've come. was actually a backhanded compliment. It ends up being an insult. And that's frustrating. It's demeaning in a way. Somebody was wanting to say something. I couldn't. Peter?
Dale, it was me. It was Peter.
Yeah.
And I've kind of intentionally kept my mouth shut the whole time. And this, I think, has been a terrific thing for us to do. First of all, it's wrong from both sides to say that nothing has changed in the last 60, 70 years. That simply is not true. Okay, we're not near where we need to be. Has been a lot of injustice, but it absolutely is not exactly the same as it's always been. And that can be documented in so many different ways. But I want to give you a personal side of this, because looking at it simplistically doesn't solve anything. My sister and brother-in-law married and chose to settle in downtown Pontiac in Detroit, right at the time when the burning and the looting took place all through that period of time in our history in the 60s. All right, this last thing that just happened, Detroit and the people of Detroit, okay, took no part in it. While Chicago was being burned down and New York was being burned down and Philadelphia was being burned down, nobody in Detroit, they met all the agitators, okay, at the city limits and said, we don't want you here. We burned our houses down back in the 60s because we were angry and we were furious and we had a good, honest feeling. We had a right to feel that way. But the people of Detroit said, we're not doing that again. Okay, we're going to stop depending on other people, and it's going to take us a long time. And they say right now, we're still not where we want to be. But my sister and her brother, not her brother, her husband, raised 6 children, okay, in downtown Waterford, downtown Pontiac. They all graduated from there. 2 or 3 of them were valedictorians, and they stayed there. They worked there. They helped that community. Okay, those kind of stories are around. Those kind of cities are around. They're in the minority. Okay, but to say that nothing has changed and that people are just as callous and just as selfish and just as bigoted as they always have been is simply not true. And okay, it doesn't help the discussion or the efforts, okay, to deny that. And while we beat ourselves up, and we need to for all that's been wrong, okay, if we don't honor those black, white, brown, whatever, who are out there, you know, actually trying to do something that will cause a change, okay, I just want that to be recognized as well. That, you know, every single white Christian is not a bigot. They've got things to struggle with. They look at things in their own lives and, oh, I got to be better. Okay, that's where it starts, and that's out there. And there are multiracial churches of all types where people sit down together. You know, I remember in Hartford, there was a wonderful black congregation, and they simply said, we don't want to have to mix with whites. We don't like the way they sing. We don't like the way they preach. And you go your way, you go mine. Well, who's at fault in that? Well, we all are. And so there's room to recognize that many good things have happened. We're not where we ought to be, but there are many good-hearted souls of every color that are out there trying to do things that are productive. And I just want that to be recognized.
Okay, thank you, Peter, for sharing that. As Joel said, it's complex, and it's wrong probably to draw it very simply, because we're talking about a vast number of people when we generalize and when we do stereotyping. So what we want to do and what I want to do tonight is to, again, educate us. For some of us, it will be a a flashback to something that you will remember having seen when these events took place. But for us to have a better understanding of the realities of racism and maybe understand better why James Baldwin said what he did when he did it. If you visit old church buildings that date back before 1850, you're likely to find buildings that have balconies with a ladder leading up to the balcony. That's where slaves sat while their owners sat down below. And I guess that's better than what some blacks have faced over the years. For instance, some have entered the church building and been told, we don't need your kind here. And so again, there's that wall of rejection that many have felt. I want to show you, and this is going to be a new technology for me, so I hope I can do it right. I'm going to show you a clip, a YouTube clip now. Okay, that's not what I wanted to happen. Okay, it's this one I want here, yeah. All right. I want to know your reaction to this video clip after I share it with you.
It wasn't long after Michael Brown was killed that people began referring to his murder as a lynching, and rightfully so. White Americans have a long history of stealing the lives of black people through lethal force. And not just lethal force, but legal lethal force, state-sanctioned lethal force. The same brutal forces of empire that lynched Sandra Bland, Ayanna Stanley Jones, Tamir Rice, Trayvon Martin, and Emmett Till are the brutal forces of empire that lynched Jesus Christ 2,000 years ago on a Roman cross. And those are the same forces that 99 years ago on this very site lynched L persons. A scheduled event that drew 5,000 people, at which soda, sandwiches, and bubblegum were sold. An event which contemporary observers described as carnival-like. The only remaining witnesses are two bridge abutments, standing guard, as it were, over the blood-soaked ground. This site, this history, this terror should bring pause to any form of theology that dehumanizes or others anyone. It brings pause to any notion of white heteropatriarchal cultural superiority. It brings pause because this is our Calvary.
Okay, Roderick was telling the story of L persons. What's your reaction to what you saw?
It's very similar to the persecution of the Jews in Poland and the brutal evil containment in the ghetto and then the subsequent slaughter.
Yeah, humans' ability to dehumanize and practice violence against one another doesn't know many bounds. What other reactions do you have?
I just feel that it just seems like that was okay to do, you know, and it's just, you know, I just can't fathom how it was. I mean, anybody was able to do something like that.
It sounds like, as it was described, like it was almost a form of entertainment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The words that he said, legal and state sanctioned, those really bothered me. And it really made me sad, very sad.
Yeah. And the reality is, I mean, that's a fair assessment of it. Others.
Slaves had no legal name. As such, they were just property, like a sack of wheat or uh, bale of cotton. They were property. They were not a person with a name, a legal name.
Yeah, and as I mentioned last week, part of the key in being able to treat people in such undignified ways is to dehumanize them in that way. And so, yeah, you make them a non-person, property.
Dale,
Yeah.
if I'm not mistaken, the old person's was 14 years old, traveled from his home state to Mississippi, went to a store, and then he supposedly flirted with a white woman. Is that correct? Then people
Well,
got together and killed him, gouged his eye out, beat him senseless, and hung him.
that's not El Person's story, but since you have talked about it, let me go ahead and share with you the story of Emmett Till,
Okay, maybe it's Emmett Till.
which you're referring to, Steve.
Yeah.
And let's hear your reaction to it after I share the story. In 1955, Emmett Till, a 14-year-old, went into Bryant's grocery, bought candy, and allegedly said, "Bye, baby," to the white woman working the counter. He was taken in the night from his uncle's house, beaten, shot, and sunk in the local river, wrapped in barbed wire and tied to a cotton gin fan. His mother insisted on an open casket, saying, "So all the world can see what they did to my boy," end quote. Corey Bryant and J.W. Milam were arrested for murder. It took the all-white jury an hour to find the men not guilty. Months later, Bryant and Milam told their story for $4,000 to a reporter and recounted telling Till, "Boy, you ain't ever going to see the sun come up again." Reaction to that?
Dale,
Yes.
I think it kind of speaks to what you were saying about frustration. People don't usually act a certain way for no reason at all. And like Joel was saying that, after a while, when you can't explain how you feel to people or whatever, unfortunately, people get frustrated and they try to get your attention in negative ways. And the movement that was going on, there were people peacefully protesting, but then you always get those people way to the left that try to take advantage or take your eyes off of, what the point that you're trying to get across is that, stop treating us differently, people just like you are. And like with Emmett Till, that was a horrible thing. I mean, his face, I'm not sure if you saw pictures. I mean, it just totally mangled up like meat, and it's just a horrible thing to be treated, lesser than. So I just think that, we have, like Peter said, we have come a long way. We've had a African American president, and now we have a a Black vice president, and many other things have changed. So we have made progress. We really have. But as you can see, there are still, I mean, a lot of prejudice out there, you know. And fortunately, we've had all kind of people marching this summer. We had white, Black, Hispanic, Indian. There's a lot of people that, you know, they just don't like the way brown, Black people, Hispanic people, whatever, are treated, you know. And so fortunately, we do have those allies to fight, you know, with us. But there are those people who still hate.
In fact, on that note, Tammy, let me share with you something that Jesus said in the Sermon on the Mount. This is Matthew chapter 5, verse 21. And I want you to think about this in terms of what we're talking about tonight in racism and the realities that some have experienced because of racism. Jesus said, "You have heard that it was said to those of old, 'You shall not murder.' And whoever murders will be liable to judgment. But I say to you that everyone who is angry with his brother will be liable to judgment. Whoever insults his brother will be liable to the council, and whoever says, 'You fool,' will be liable to the hell of fire." What Jesus is talking about there is that obviously murder is against the will and heart of God. But to have contempt for another human being was viewed and is viewed in the heart of God as severely as murder is viewed. And so when you put that teaching in front of us as disciples of Jesus, you realize pretty quickly that we need to be defenders of, again, the dignity and the respect of all people. And the idea of having contempt for someone because of their skin color is totally, completely inconsistent with being a follower of Jesus. Let me share with you another video clip. And these are pretty heavy, but I think it's important for us to see them, to appreciate and understand what the experience of some has been. This is the bombing of the 16th Street Baptist Church in Alabama. Open it up and play it.
It was the oldest Black church in Birmingham, and it was fairly large. And so it made sense that meetings would happen there, which would also make it a target. On Sunday morning, September 15th, it was Youth Day, right after Sunday school. Addie Mae Collins, Carol Robinson, Denise McNair, and Cynthia Wesley are getting ready to go into the choir.
I remember Addie, I was closest to Addie. We would go to church picnics. Addie and I just gravitated to each other.
Cynthia Wesley was a friend of mine. She was at my school. She was a 9th grader. Just started in September, and I was an 11th grader.
I remember Denise back there always smiling, and she was the only child. And I remember Carol Robinson being quiet, and she played in the orchestra at her school.
Addie Mae's sister Sarah is also in that ladies' lounge. Sarah said the last thing that she remembers is seeing them helping each other tie on sashes, and then it went dark. We're talking about an explosion that reverberates through the entire city of Birmingham. Everybody heard it.
I was at South Illerton Baptist Church, and our pastor was shifting kind of nervously across the room and said he had received word that 16th Street Baptist Church had been bombed.
I was in Sunday school class. The building seemed like it was shaking off its foundation. Fumes, smelling fumes, and getting hit in the head. I couldn't find my younger sister. Only later to find out that she was taken to the hospital. She was only 4. She was cut in the head, blood dripping down her clothes and down her face.
Reverend John Cross comes down after the explosion to go into the hole and hears moaning.
My father heard somebody saying, Annie, Annie, and he realized that Sarah was calling her sister's name because that's the last voices that she heard before the explosion occurred.
They find the bodies and they're almost literally stacked on top of each other.
He said they looked like they had been blown together.
It devastated me. It was just so painful to know that these girls were killed at church. They had not done anything to deserve something like that.
That was enough to pull people off the fence. Kids are supposed to be safe at church. This is not supposed to happen in America. We're above this kind of thing. And so this was the catalyst to get some things moving.
Okay, reaction.
Total absence of love.
Yeah. Yeah, 4 little girls. Other reaction.
Kindness is always appropriate.
No kindness there though, right?
And a church building is where we're often most aware of God, and it's an attack on God because it's an attack on his children. It's an attack on people who are doing their best to follow what he wants.
In some ways, it reminded me when I went to Rwanda, there were people during the genocide who retreated to church buildings, thinking that they had sanctuary there, that surely no one would come in and show disrespect to God and human life by killing someone in a church building. But just like in Rwanda, this case in Alabama showed that some people have no regard, that there's not really sanctuary, there's no place to hide sometimes from this kind of malicious hatred. Other reactions?
Well, Dale, I'm very simplistic, but to me, it's all a symptom of the biggest problem of all is we've got to help people be more Christian everywhere. I mean, it's a lack of love. It's all of this stems out of not being what Christ wants us to be.
Yeah, and that may have sounded simplistic, but it's spot on in what the problem is. I mean, it's rooted in a lack of love. You're exactly right. One more reaction. Anybody have one more reaction?
Dale,
Brian.
Okay, Brian, jump in.
It just seems evil. It's just pure evil. It's horrible. And too, I think about all the people who knew about it and didn't stop it. So that's, and there's probably a lot of people who knew about it and didn't stop it and just said, that's okay. Whether they spoke up or didn't spoke up or speak up, they were, condoning it.
Which is a motivation, I think, Brian, for, again, now that our sensitivities have been maybe offended, but certainly awakened to what some have experienced. For us, when we hear things that are racist, when we hear of mistreatment, we cannot in good conscience anymore be quiet about it. We have to say something in order to demonstrate our love and not be complicit, as you're talking about those who knew but didn't say anything.
Yep. Agreed.
Part of the repair that needs to be done is to humanize people who have been dehumanized as property or slavery or insignificant or less than, whatever it is. Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated not because he was ever a violent threat. He was assassinated because people were afraid of the power of thoughts and words, that they could lose their advantage if thoughts and words of equality took root. In fact, George Floyd, Trayvon Martin, Black Lives Matter, protests and violence this summer, we talked about why there was so much anger behind that, but I want to go to something kind of simple. This relates to Trayvon Martin. I wear hoodies, especially in the wintertime after I've been working out, pretty commonly. I have never been afraid of wearing a hoodie. Never. Okay, no matter where I am, I've never been afraid of wearing a hoodie. How does wearing a hoodie get you shot? What's taking place that someone who is wearing a hoodie gets shot?
They're looking for different people. A hoodie just gives them the first thing that they're looking for. But then they have to have more visual before they act.
And so there's a profiling that takes place, and I understand that a certain amount of that really kind of needs to take place in order for security and police officials to do their job well. But it seems almost unthinkable that a young man could be shot down because of that circumstance. And yet, and here's the significant thing I'm trying to help us understand. For me as a white person, I had no qualms about wearing a hoodie. I could wear one tonight and I wouldn't have any reservation about that. I know, and we may hear them talk about it next week when we interview some of the people that I've asked to be part of our group next week. We may hear them tell of them having to instruct their children, if you go out, never wear a hoodie. Why should you have to tell a kid that?
You know, Dale, it's really interesting because growing up here in Lubbock, I haven't gone through a lot of things with the cops that a lot of other Black males my age have had to go through. I mean, I've been stopped and I've been profiled and things like that, but I've never feared for my life when I've been stopped and things like that. So it's really interesting, but that, you know, millions of Black males around my age and even older and younger do fear for their lives when they're pulled over or they're wearing a hoodie. And it's been, in the media that like they've been portraying us. Well, if you're wearing a hoodie, then you're a gangster, you're a thug, you're somebody who should be feared. Upon approaching you, we have to take caution when you're just, doing everyday activities, running or walking or barbecuing or things like that. So, it's really interesting because not all Black people go through that, but a significant um, portion of or a percent of Black males have to go through that. And we've seen it in the media where you could just be running down the block and then you wind up shot. I mean, it happened with Ahmaud Arbery. He wasn't doing anything to anybody. So it's really interesting to think about.
Yeah, and we're going to come back to that particular story, Joel. And again, what I'm trying to convey tonight is not a condemnation of police. What I'm trying to convey tonight is for those of us who have not had these experiences to get a flavor of what others who have been prejudged because of their skin color, what they have experienced and what many of them continue to experience, so that we can understand why there's so much anger and why there is so much frustration and why we see such acting out at times, and to sympathize with that so that we can become advocates for what is right and what is good and what is true. That's what I'm really aiming at tonight through sharing what I'm sharing, which leads us to another question. The burning of a cross in your yard. Some of you may have more knowledge about the Ku Klux Klan than I do, but how can the symbol of Christianity, it's become the symbol of Christianity for many people because of what Jesus accomplished through the cross, but how can the symbol of Christianity become synonymous with hatred and violence? Is that
Look
not,
at the Crusades. Yeah.
Yeah, the Crusades are another example where violent means and coercion, force, was used to control people's behavior in the name of Jesus. No wonder some people look at that history and think that's not something I want to be a part of. So how does that happen?
It had legal protection.
Yes, it had legal protection, and even where it was illegal, sometimes law enforcement looked the other way. But symbols are important, and I think probably the cross was not chosen by accident. But what I'm wanting you again to see is how things that are wonderful and true and good, the cross of Christ, not that the cross itself was good, but what Jesus accomplished through the cross, can be taken and misused and abused in such a way. And to understand the volatile feelings that would be behind that kind of circumstance, why people would react so hurt and so angrily to that kind of misuse of power and misuse of something that's divine.
They've been, to me, they've been brainwashed as Hitler brainwashed the Germans, and they must have been brainwashed, to say that this was against the Bible. And so they, try to make it that they were following God. by doing these things,
Yeah,
which is awful.
it's getting sanction from God. It's
Yeah.
getting approval from God, which is again something that people have often done is to pull in the power of the divine in order to endorse their misbehavior. I want to know your reaction to this. Hangings, of course, have been used as intimidation and fear to continue to control people as well. And we, of course, read a couple of stories tonight or seen a couple of stories about that. Let's bring it real close to home in Lubbock. I'm going to highlight a 1923 ordinance. In fact, just to let you know, there's a hope that in 2023, which will be the 100-year anniversary of this ordinance, that we will see significant improvement in Lubbock in relations between people of various colors. I'm going to read to you this 1923 ordinance in Lubbock. An ordinance prescribing that portion of the city of Lubbock within which Negroes and persons of African descent containing as 1/8 Negro blood shall reside, except bona fide servants residing on the place where employed, forbidding persons to sell property outside of such district to Negroes or persons containing as much as 1/8 Negro blood, forbidding the rental of property outside such district to persons containing as much as 1/8 Negro blood, providing penalties and declaring an emergency account of Negroes living in other districts and causing danger to health and pollution of the atmosphere. Be it ordained by the City Council of the City of Lubbock, Texas. Section 1. No Negro or persons of African descent or containing as much as 1/8 Negro blood shall own property or reside thereon in any part of this city except that part lying south of 16th Street and east of Avenue C. And no person shall rent or lease to any such Negro or person of African descent, or one containing as much as 1/8 Negro blood outside of the territory limits as above. I left out section 2 and 3 because they were insignificant for our purposes, but here's section 4. The fact that Negroes and persons of African descent and persons containing as much as 1/8 Negro blood are residing in various portions of this city, and their residence is dangerous to the health and pollutes the earth and atmosphere, creates an emergency and necessity that the removal of the charter requiring an ordinance to be read at 2 several meetings be suspended, and this ordinance be acted at the meeting of its introduction and effective upon publication. Attest, Percy Spencer, Mayor, City of Lubbock. Secretary J.R. Germany, City of Lubbock. Approved as to form, R.A. Souter, City Attorney. What's your reaction to the 1923 Lubbock Ordinance?
It was very clear.
It was very clear.
And its purpose was defined. It couldn't be misunderstood.
Does it surprise you that Lubbock would have such an ordinance in our history?
Yeah, I read that today, Dale, and it blew my mind. It literally just, you know, I was sitting there talking with Marla, and I just, it just blew my mind that what I was reading of of, to me, it was so much hatred. Like, you know, I mean, to me right now, sometimes I feel like, what was it that they were afraid of? What was it that white people were afraid of blacks? You know, I mean, it just, you know, and me growing up in Michigan, it was different for me, you know, and that's why coming to Texas, period, and finding history like this, you know, is just, you know, I've never even thought about this growing up, you know. But I always felt too, I mean, just being born already, I was guilty. For some reason, I was already guilty of something because of my color, you know, and I just couldn't fathom, you know, being black and feeling even worse than I do. You know, just being born and you're already second class or whatever, you know, it just, you know, and that's why I see, like, what with rappers, they're just trying to make it. Sports, the athletic, they're just trying to make it, but they still feel the same way. I mean, that's, you know, hearing some of the basketball players talk, is it's like, I can be who I want to be, but I know I'm guilty, you know, just because of who I am, being black. But just reading this, it took me, it hurt, actually.
Yeah, it's disappointing in many ways, troubling.
Yeah, until today, doesn't have a law anymore, but since I came to Lubbock, I heard a lot, like, don't go to the east area of Lubbock. So it's not just something that was happened before, it's still happening. I'm tired to hear a lot here. It's some white people just say, oh no, I never go to the east area of Lubbock. And it's still real until today.
Yeah. And again, what I'm trying to convey tonight, and we're not going to have time because we've run out of time for tonight. A lot of times you hear people refer to systemic racism, and you say, well, what does that mean? I mean, we don't have slavery anymore in this country as a sanctioned atrocity. We have civil rights. What racism is there? Well, what we're talking about right now, that there are laws on the books that continue to have, even though this is not practiced anymore, thank God, that set a tone that's still being felt, as Melina has pointed out, even in 2021, almost 100 years later. And so we're going to come back later on in our study, because we've run out of time tonight, to talk about systemic racism and, again, get a better understanding, hopefully, of why people who have been oppressed and treated different because of their race, because of their skin color is the right way to say it, are reacting the way they are. And what we can do as God's people to be part of the solution instead of part of the problem. Anybody want to make a final comment?
Dale,
Yes,
one of
ma'am.
the most troubling things about that ordinance is that it wears the veil of public health. And as Henry says, by virtue of birth, it tells someone that you must be dirty. You must not be good enough to live next to. And that's worse than a slap in the face.
Imagine that's what you're told all your life. Now do we begin to understand? Now I know why people are angry. You know, a little child is told, you're dirty, you're less than, you're not worth living next to. If you're told that, why there would be anger. So I hope that this has been educational from that standpoint and helps us understand and appreciate some of the realities of racism that certainly haven't touched my life and probably a lot of us in this class tonight. But now, after looking at some of this, I hope we have a much greater sympathy for why some people feel and react the way they do. Next week, I'm going to bring into our class some people I'm going to interview and have them share even more of their current experiences. So I look forward to doing that with you, and I wish you God's blessing the rest of the week, that you be safe. And in this time of so much loss and sadness, I hope you experience God's joy as well. Have a good week.